Um, so yeah, I wanted to bring the two of you together today because there's many connections I can see in the work that you're both doing in the world. And yeah, I'm projecting, I'm imagining, I'm constructing potential futures where the three of us are even working together on things and building things out. And that may or may not happen, but it feels to me like there's an energetic resonance or a frequency here among us where there's an interest in common things, and there are capacities to be able to see certain things that are common among us, and I don't feel that very often in conversation. So just based on our last conversation, Darshan, there was one point in particular where we went a bit deep, and I'd sort of mentioned to you that part of the inspiration for that had been a conversation I'd had with Forrest. So I also wanted to kind of just honor him in the co-creation process, instead of, you know, me taking an idea that we had co-created and trying to, you know, build it with you. So it's saying, hey, you know, Forrest and I came up with this thing, and is there a way that we could somehow kind of work together to build something like this out? And if I'm remembering correctly, the specific idea was around kind of like developmental spaces, right? Like, you know, Carl and yourself have, and the whole team at Adeption really, have built this AI that can track development on an individual basis, which still gets me excited just talking about it. And you know, the potential implications of what can be, you know, built with that has gotten my kind of mind spinning for the last year and a half, and working on building some things out with that. But one of the things that came up in conversation with Forrest a little while ago was almost like a VR space or a VR game or something like that, that is developmentally, like, has development built into it. And I'm not aware of anything like that that exists, because I don't think it was probably even really possible to build before now. And I think that kind of the idea here is to start to move beyond leadership development as a sort of like an assessment and a you know, whether a coaching session to make you improve or whatever. And it's about saying like let's make development fun. Let's like the same way, you know, like Forrest was an athlete, you know, and it's like you don't just get a, you know, build your body so that you have a better body. It's like you build your body better so you can play sports better and be a better athlete, right? And for me, that's kind of also one of the common themes here is how do we make development something that is beyond just, okay, I need this to perform my job better kind of thing, or to be a better leader, which is fair enough. But it's like, you know, can we make this something that it's like it's inherently fun to grow and develop and to evolve yourself. And if we can do that as a collective, right, you know, where we have spaces where people can enter into and we can play around with how we're expressing ourselves at different developmental stages, and also beyond just, you know, leading edge type stuff, because I think a lot of the developmental, particularly vertical development, is focused on expanding out your leading edge. And I'm curious also about filling out the earlier stages, right? About deepening and expanding the breadth of various stages along the way. And I'm seeing that something like this could be a way for us to make that both feasible and begin to be able to track and measure it, which may also be useful. So that's kind of where the situation, you know, emerged, that I imagined it would be useful to bring us all together. And I will, yeah, maybe I'll invite Forrest to share a little bit more first about what he remembers of the conversation we had. And then I'd love to hear your reflections, Darshan.
Thanks, Fionn. I remember we were we were inquiring into well, first of all, what comes up for me is how fun it is to grow and evolve and heal. And so um, in a way, we don't need to, it's fun to like, for me, it's the most fun game I've ever played. Right. So it's like, I don't feel like, or the game can reflect that essence of that without us kind of having to make it that way, which I love. And one thing I remember is we were talking about like grouping collectives together based on stage of development, and then it was like if you came up to if you like evolved into a later stage of development and then you weren't operating at that stage, you could actually come back down. And so there was this like um, there was a way of playing in different collectives, and the collectives in each stage of development would build out the world that existed, and maybe the worlds, right, that exist in that plane, in that tier, in that uh, level of meaning making, level of complexity. Um, and hmm. Yeah, I get curious too now that we're talking about the vertical development and breadth and horizontal development, like um, what it would be like to voluntarily in like to voluntarily, I say devolve, but I think you use a different word, like involution, to voluntarily go down and say, okay, like um, I want to hang out with people at 1.5 to use the stages model, or I want to hang out with people who are like in a real achievement consciousness, right? Like 3.5 in stages, and really just kind of get more breadth and width in that area, in that level of development. And then one other thing I remember about our conversation was that in having stages of development and having collectives in each one, there was a question around what happens if someone has a crash, because there could be, okay, I'm at 4.5 going into 5.0, and then I hit a crash and it drops me all the way down to 1.0, right? And 1.0 for anyone listening is like a newborn. Like when we first come into the world, it can be the first year of our life. And so I wonder about when someone crashes, do we just put them in the stage of development they crashed to, or do we also have some sort of um, process of like a healing process, awareness-based process, awareness-based system for saying, okay, let's actually look at the driver that failed there, or let's look at the yeah, the underlying meaning making kind of breakdown that happened, or the underlying being, um, or the part of ourself that came online and need to be seen and heard and cared for and loved, right? Uh, maybe there was an infant inside of us that was tucked away in the bedroom and needed to be more fully loved and integrated in us moving up into 5.0 in a healthy way. So while it could be interesting to just take that person and put them in the developmental level with a bunch of 6-month-old babies, it also would be really interesting to me to say, okay, when that happens, what could it look like to like catch somebody as they're crashing, or almost like as they're falling, create these like wings, these feathers that they can like a soft pillow they can land into and actually be held and loved and cared for. So that's what comes up for me for now.
This is a fantastic discussion to have. I have been a big believer of games. I believe a lot of my strategic thinking came through games like Dune 2000. Always been the PC gamer, if I'd like to call myself. And then if you move into games like uh, World of Warcraft or Diablo 2, um,
Oh my God,
again,
my favorite game of all time, Diablo
you
2.
know, just phenomenal games which use a lot of moving up and down the levels, like you were talking about. And then you also have the competency that kind of thinks through. And for me, I'm always curious. Not only is it engaging, but it is challenging. It really, you need to put in the time, you need to put in the efforts. And so, Forrest, a lot of respect for you being an athlete. I know it's not easy. You not only have to push your physical limit, but you also have to push your mental limit, and you have to stretch yourself. But that is very focused towards a person like me who's kind of on an achievement, for whom achievement is an important parameter. But I also understand not everyone is like this, right? People are happy and content with where they are and what they are doing, right? So kind of connecting that thought to this game, right, um, is important. And how do we think about that? The second thing is, I gave the GMAT before I came to Babson for my MBA. This was over a decade ago. And I found GMAT to be an extremely interesting test, because the way it's an adaptive exam. Essentially, it throws a question at you and it puts you in a certain bracket. It assumes you're in the top, uh, 100 level, which is between 700 to 800, 800 being the highest. And if you kind of get it right, it'll throw you between 750 to 800. But if you get it wrong, it'll throw you a question between 750 to 650, right? So it kind of continuously adapts uh, to where you are, and it tries uh, to laser in into what's your level at. Now that is an assessment based approach, right? It's not a game, but it's 4 hours. It's grueling. It's on a skill. Your skill to test also kind of comes into the picture. And so, should we think about stage? As an athlete, you're used to, there's game time, right? But in humans, there is no set game time. There is not enough drama, so to say, because it's normal, right? There is, I've been a sports person my life as well. In school, studies was never important to me. It kind of developed over a period of time, but during school, it was primarily, cricket, football, basketball. I'd play that for the first 15 years of my life. And so being competitive is another area which needs to be thought through, right? Competition breeds engagement, it breeds excellence, right? How many times have you been pushed because of competition, right? Is another part to kind of think about. And then my last thought, while you were kind of speaking, what happens if you go from level 5 to level 1 and you crash into it? I've studied how kind of plants develop, and there's a lot to learn from how plants develop. My family business was in fertilizers. I ran that business for some time. I'm a chemical engineer by background. Didn't use chemical engineering for probably a good part of the last decade now. But one thing kind of stuck with me was plants are used to absorbing nutrients. So you have about 12 or 13 nutrients, and the micronutrients, which is potassium, magnesium, zinc, all of those. When a plant does not get enough of a particular nutrient, you got to think of it like a bucket made up of strands, right? And these strands are each being a nutrient. And so when one nutrient is kind of less, it goes down. And so when you pour water, what happens is it falls from the point of minimum strand, right? So you, and so that is where I kind of, my thought was coming through at that time is maybe the overall level is pretty strong, right? From the new, all the nutrients. And it was that one nutrient which needs to be reinforced, or then that becomes the point of breaking, that one breakup point, so to say, one point of failure in investment, as they try to call it, right? And so that I think is very, very important. The other thought on what you mentioned, maybe a person is happy to be at about 3.5 rather than 4.5 and constantly pushing. It takes a toll, right? When you're constantly pushing, when you're constantly at the point of an achievement, it is physically draining, it's mentally draining. You age faster probably, right? But is that also a cause of building confidence? Am I comfortable at stage 3? Do I like to play the same games again and again? Say, for example, Mortal Kombat, or Dune 2000 in skirmish mode, because I know I'm going to win, right? And so I'm going to win is a function of my skill and my competency at that stage, thereby kind of me taking care of my mind and my confidence better. Who likes to lose again and again and again, right? And so that is another point of building confidence, which is crucial. Now the last point on this is, are we focusing only on the mind, right? We are talking a lot about energies. I think there is the mind, body, and the soul. And you can call soul or define soul the way you would want to. In different cultures, in different communities, there is a different way to look at that energy. And so do we harness that energy? If so, how do we harness that energy? If it is only the body, which is to a large extent the skill, then how do we look at this game? Because Nintendo Wii does that, right? You're playing a game, but it's also physical in nature, right? So we are bringing in another dimension in a physical game, so to say. Is it stage based? We have talked a lot about stage based. Stage based, again, being focused on the mind, right? In a game, in a physical game in sports, it's easier to kind of think about the stages. But is it situation based? Because a lot of what, so I have 8-year-old twins, right? And their summer vacations just got over, but their summer vacations, they read this, they've been reading Famous Five, Secret Seven, Thea Stilton, and all of those books, amazing, Harry Potter. So back in February, they kind of said, Dad, why is it that we can't why can't we earn money, right? And this purely came out of one of the books that they read. I said, okay, you can earn money. What is it that you can create by which people will pay you money? And so they kind of said they're very good with creativity and arts and drawing and all of that stuff. Like they're far more competent than I am. So over the summer, they made handmade greeting cards, sets of 3, and we just put together. They thought about the logo, and then this went door to door to kind of sell as well. The idea being, it generated about $200, which is not bad for 8-year-olds, right? The idea being, they now have the confidence that they can earn money, right? And so the way I look at it is they've leveled up. Now they're saying, well, but one greeting card takes me 2 hours to make, whereas for me to make a batch of cookies or desserts, and they make some lovely muffins and cakes and pastries and all of that stuff, I could do that on a weekend morning and generate $200, right? So is it situation based? Is it emotion based? Is it that energy based? These are some dimensions that we need to think through when we kind of come out with a game or think about a game. Today, the technology is there. The technology has always been there. EA Sports has been pushing us from the 1980s, right? The chips are, I mean, if we look at augmented reality, virtual reality, our phones are more powerful than what they were combined in the 90s. So making it is not the difficult part from a technology standpoint. Uh, it's not even expensive, right? So I'm going to just take a pause over here. But those were some thoughts that kind of came to my mind, connecting some different disciplines, where my kind of brain shoots in different directions. But I'm assuming this is just a brainstorming session.
Very much so. Thank you. Thank you for sharing all of that. And I'm struck by your 8-year-olds and would love to hear more about that at some point. I love also the direction that you're going, where we're talking about, I guess multiple dimensions or threads to be tracked, or, what are the things that actually we can look at as forms of development. And I think this is, that question is something that is somewhat at the leading edge of the research field right now. Like there's different schools of thought about it, of how we have these different developmental, like Ken Wilber calls them lines of development, right? And then people like Terry O'Fallon and Kim Barta, they talk about actually how those all kind of start to come together in the later stages. But it's an interesting sort of way of how do we determine, what are some of the things that would be interesting to measure in there. And it brought up for me when you were talking about, like what sort of experiences would people be having in those games? It reminded me of, I don't know if you guys have heard of the 3-body problem. It's a sci-fi book by a Chinese author, Cixin Liu, and it's an amazing book, by the way. But basically, in the book, there's this alien species that's basically coming to invade Earth, and there's this computer game that is created to give people an understanding of what their planet is like. And in this computer game, you kind of have to figure out, this question is the 3-body problem. They live in a solar system where there's 3 suns, and all these 3 suns are moving in different directions. And the point of the game is to basically figure out how to understand how 3 suns kind of move around each other, which is kind of mathematically almost like an impossible problem to figure out. But what happens is, people play and they get through certain levels of the game, and it's like, by being able to get through certain levels, you're connected with different people who are able to sort of move through those different levels. And so it's kind of, it's interesting for me to think about that in terms of, what would it be like to have a game that was so fun that everyone played it, but that there were kind of only certain things that only certain, developmental levels could maybe get to, that otherwise, like you couldn't like almost get to, and how you could sort of build communities of people who are kind of seeing things at those different developmental levels. And that kind of just came to me as you were speaking, Darshan. So it kind of was interesting to just think about that as almost like because one of the things that I've been sort of looking for, thinking about is, there's more and more, particularly, my particular interest is in younger people who kind of have some later stage capacities, or some interesting capacities that might be useful to planet Earth, but that they are young. So they're either not empowered or not kind of, respected in the business world, or, that kind of way, where it's like, one of the ways in which most of the ecosystems that we live in at the moment operate is such that, experience matters and age matters and how white your hair is matters and these kinds of things. And there are certain areas where those are very important, and there are certain areas where those are virtually irrelevant. And I would love to find a way to kind of have a catch net for people, right? Where it's, one of the ways that I see this at the moment is like the leadership circle, and how they sort of like they do it with lots and lots of people and leaders all around the world. And, the leaders that are kind of maxing out the circle are going to give us an indication that, perhaps they have some later stage capacities. And that could then sort of be like a filter to pull people in and say, hey, it seems like you've kind of maxed out the circle. Let's kind of see what other things you can sort of do. And I'm imagining potentially a game like this being sort of like something that is so fun that everyone will play it, but that there are sort of like ways to sort of like filter out or catch net people who may have some capacities that then on a collective level, we could actually start pulling people together, and potentially working on real world applications of what happens when you get X number of people who have later stage capacities together into a room, a virtual room perhaps, and start thinking about real world problems and how we could collectively work together on things. So that was one of the ideas that came up as you were speaking, Darshan.
Superb. Thanks for sharing that. There's the Thiel Foundation, Peter Thiel Foundation. I'm not very sure if you're aware of it, but he operates on a wonderful model. I'm pretty active in the venture capital space within the startups. As an investor, I had the chance to interact with 5,000 odd entrepreneurs. I was used to work at Mass Challenge Boston, and then here in India. And so, I keep hearing and seeing a lot of people whose net worth is upwards of about $500 million, to say that, exactly the things that you mentioned, which is how can we figure out people who have capacities, but for some reason or the other are not able to use their capabilities, their abilities, in the best way possible. So is there a way where we could even, money doesn't solve everything, but it does take you far. It does help you with a lot of the issues. So can we put together a program? How can we create something which is going to not only identify these people, because if you had to identify it, you could put a pot of gold and the bees would come, right? Or you would have honey and you would have the bees would come. That concept could be there. But the second stage of this is, well, how do we figure them? How do we get them to work with each other? How do we develop it further? And so the world of startups is one where you're again pushed to, there's a lot of stage development that takes place within the founders, right, in the early stages. So that's another area which probably is an interesting one to see. I haven't seen a single decent assessment that's come out to, or a way to come out to say why the magic, why the chemistry between those teams work, which I'm assuming, Forrest, is similar, say in a team of athletes who might be competing together in a team sport, right? Not necessarily in an individual sport. And so how do we think about that? How do we measure that? And lastly, I think, I don't know if I mentioned this to you, but there are two great examples that have come through. One is Jerusalem Venture Partners, JVP, out of Israel. And the other one was out of US, Mike Spicer Playbook, Incubation Playbook. Mike and JVP have successfully incubated a bunch of $1 billion worth ideas over the years. JVP, I think, is one of the most, has the highest conversion in a way by which they can incubate, get a group of people without a lot of money, though, within 12 months, get to a point where they are able to launch something meaningful, right? And build meaningful businesses. Now, what is meaningful is subjective to everyone. But that's something that I thought was another area which we need to tap into, because there is some learning there which we could use. And so my only reason to share this is startup is a game of variables, multiple variables, which are dynamic in motion, right? And so the job of a founder is to figure out what these variables are at any given point of time and bring them together with limited resources, right? And so that's essentially his or her superpower, the ability to bring it together and then create something meaningful to sell, right? Or make use of for someone else. So that is also an important part, because you've mentioned, younger people who have later stage capacities but aren't, given a break. And I consider myself to be in that bracket, because early on I've had to it's a very cultural thing as well, where you're told you don't have enough white hair, you don't have enough experience, you're young, keep quiet, you know uh, uh, do what I tell you to do, right? So it is a very authoritarian, very top down approach. And so yeah, so I think that's pretty cool to think about it when we have to think about bringing people together at certain capacities. I'm just going to, yeah, take a pause over here. I can ramble on.
So I have plenty coming up for me that I'd love to kind of continue to dig into, but I wanted to check in with Forrest and how this is all landing on you.
Yeah, go for it, Fionn. I've got there's definitely stuff coming up, and I'd love for you to go.
Well, the first piece that I very much appreciate you bringing to the table, Darshan, is about this whole startup and the idea of investment and like the criteria for investment. Like, how do investors actually decide what projects, what people they're actually investing in? Because more and more from a lot of the VCs that I hear out there, it's almost less and less about the specific product or idea, and it's more and more about the people. Am I willing to invest in these people? And the question then becomes, well, like, how are you making that decision about the people that you're actually investing in? And two things are kind of coming up for me around that. One is what you said about the team dynamic, right? Because you can have, geniuses and talented individuals, but if they can't work in a team, then it's going to be very hard to build something. And it kind of brings me back to the book Stealing Fire by Stephen Kotler and Jamie Wheel, and how they look at, some of the top kind of performing, teams, whether that's the Navy SEALs or different sorts of, collectives of people that come together and able to get into that kind of flow state together, where they're kind of just all in sync and they can feel each other and they can, really respond in the moment to what's going on. And like you said, I haven't seen any assessment that's actually able to track or measure that. And that would be a fascinating thing to be able to put some numbers to and get some data around, is, how do you actually see what dynamics are useful for building something over time? And like we've seen in the leadership development space, like a lot of these kind of later stage leaders seem to have certain capacities when it comes to long-term thinking, when it comes to being calm under pressure, when it comes to being able to think in complex ways, when it comes to being able to come with creative ideas, when it comes to really being able to see the whole picture, like systemically. And I'm curious what collectives of those later stage leaders perhaps could come up with, because we have no, as far as I'm aware, we have no data on that. We have no research on that. And beyond that, what are the structures, the makeups of teams that actually work well and ground things in reality? Because we also know the problem of having too many cooks in the kitchen, and not enough, people who wash the dishes, or people who, serve the food, or people who open the door to let the guests in and make sure that they have a good customer service experience, right? And so kind of getting an understanding of what is the kind of the balance of people who have capacities at different stages, and finding ways to be able to ground things in reality with a full team. And that's, I think, also one of the things that often gets missed in this whole vertical leadership development space is the team approach and the value of each individual level, as opposed to just the later stage capacities. It's like, how do we really value everything that everyone can bring to the table, and what that means in a team dynamic where you are, if we talk about it in the startup sense, trying to take an idea and make it into reality and grow that out. And that's something that I'd be, very curious about to kind of experiment with and figure out more about, to see how, like you said, I mean, the kind of the startup space it's almost a bit like a game space too, right? Where you can take an idea and you can play with it, and you can experiment with it, and you can throw it at reality in different ways and see what sticks. And that's, that's a very specific type of capacity, right? That, if we look at all these VCs out there that are trying to invest in people, well, I'm curious as to what would be a tool that would be useful for them to be able to make wise decisions about the funneling of funds, right? Like right now, you make your best, based on your experience, based on investing in other people, based on, their past performance, based on their portfolio, based on, whatever sorts of things. And it's like, how do we go inside this individual and then see also the team, or their capacity to build a team around them, and be able to build out metrics that not only are going to give the investor an idea of, whether or not it's a wise decision to invest in this human being, but also that give the investor and the individual an idea of, like, what are the specific areas that would be useful to develop that maybe don't exist yet? Or what are some people that need to be sort of surrounded with this person because they have amazing capacities in this space, but they're completely missing something over here, and you would need that kind of support system in place. As sort of not just like a fixed idea model of, this is someone who's good to invest in, this is someone who's bad to invest in, but rather, well, everyone has certain capacities, and if I'm going to invest in this person, then they would need this kind of support around them in order for them to be successful.
Perfect. I'll answer that, but maybe I just want to first let Forrest go, because he had some thoughts to share. He was going to go after you, so I'll just take a pause and then respond to that.
I feel like a lot's coming, and it's still coming. So maybe Darshan, you want to go, and then I can go after you.
Sure. Yeah. Fair enough. So this venture capital industry is a tough one on various fronts. To answer your question, in my experience, and I've made a few investments, right, in India and the US. The earlier the stage, the more focus. So seed stage investment is about backing people and backing the space that they are operating in. So I have a thesis, for example, that if I'm going to invest at seed stage in the next 6 months or next 12 months or 24 months, I feel, or I think my analysis shows that healthcare logistics is going to pick up around the world, especially in India. So let me find out who's working in this space, right? So the job of an investor is to bet on the horse and not necessarily train the horse. There's a huge difference between the two, right? And so most VCs and most founders are comfortable that way too, that, give me the money, I'll build it, don't tell me what I need to do, right? That's my job, let me figure it out. Now what you are saying is a value add, but how many investors, even the best of the best, how many of them really do care? What they would say is, okay, let me make a few intros. You want a CTO? Let me put you in touch with one of the best recruiters, not the best CTOs, the best recruiters, right? And so the idea is to use the power, the influence, the network, the net worth, both to it, right? To solving that problem and make enough bets in the space. So the same problem is being tackled by 5 different startups or 5 different teams differently. So I just want one of them to win, to make my $1 into $10. Okay, that's essentially, it's a financial returns game. Um, if we look at larger companies, the stock markets, the value investors of our time, you'd say the same thing, right? You'd again see, do I trust the management? Do I trust the space? Yes, innovation, yes, team building, yes, everything, all of that, right? But that's really not my thing. I just want to see how much money can these guys make me, right? What is it? And so what is my exposure limit to a large extent? If I have $100, I'm going to bet $5 on startups and hope that those $5 become $50 over a 5-year period, right? Which is not a bad return, essentially, is what I'm trying to get at. How do they still do it? I think that's the Mike Spicer incubation playbook. I'm very curious about this, so I read a lot and I kind of curate it. I've collected a bunch of great readings within this space since my Babson days, which is 2011, which is almost a decade now. I'll share a couple of links, a couple of articles, which you can then take a look at. But how do they look at it? It's not a lot of, it's a lot of what I feel, what I think, rather than what I know, right? And so, and plus I'm just building a big margin for error or a margin of safety into my calculations. So I'm not wiped out of the game of money in this case, right? So that's something to think about. As far as, getting investors money, there's a lot of liquidity. There's just too much liquidity in the market, right? It's people with decent profiles are getting backed for a couple of $1 million pretty easily today. There is a company called Kumo Space. You might want to take a look at it. KUMO space.com. These are a bunch of recent grads out of the US who kind of wanted to create a better version of Zoom using virtual reality. And so they've kind of created 3D environments. You should check it out. You can create your free profile. We could have used that instead of Zoom. But they've got like $4 million or so in funding, is what the founder was telling me, the founders, which are a bunch of kids, right? But they've created something which is slightly different from what's out there, robust enough, fun enough, solves a particular problem. And, these kids seem to be enjoying doing what they're doing. So why not, right? Make money while enjoying. Who's ever regretted that? So, so yeah. So I think that's the way it is. There's something called as Founders Institute, fi.org, I think. And Founders Institute has created an assessment to really figure out if a person is committed in the earlier stage to a business idea. See, when I get an idea, I mean, most people have decent ideas. The difference lies to go from having an idea to being committed to build it, and then from being committed to get conviction, right? That this is the thing that I'm going to do. And once I have conviction, then, that at that point is where the VCs are saying, has this person put his or her own skin in the game, their savings, their time is completely dedicated to this cause in solving this problem? Now here's my money, because this person has put his or her own money. And I think that this is a space which is going to make my $1 into $10. That's it, right? And I'm going to find 10 such people solving the same or similar problem in the same space, and I'm going to put $1 each, so that I just need one of them to hit, so that my I get more than $10. Then I put in, I get $30. That's the math.
Thank you both. I've been enjoying listening. Maybe I'll talk now. I'm really enjoying this conversation. I spent quite a bit of time in my 20s in the startup space, either starting them or working in them. So I'm really enjoying this. And what comes up for me is when I look at my hypothesis for what's happening in our human evolution right now, like we have these major, like developmentally, we look at history and there's these major inflection points when consciousness shifted, right? Like the agrarian revolution or the industrial revolution or the information age, when all like our culture and our systems and our institutions and technologies shifted along with our collective consciousness. Like we really reinvented ourselves as a species at these different inflection points, going from being hunter-gatherers to farmers, for example. And I say this because my hypothesis is that we are in a transition right now in another inflection point. Like I feel like we've outgrown the world as it is in a lot of ways, and all of the disturbance that's happening in the world, the disruption, the polarization, what I'm calling the collective dark night of the soul, is all of us kind of wandering into the world that wants to be born right now. I see it as the consciousness revolution is what I'm calling it. But for me, it brings some really interesting questions online. Like I have this list of what I call emerging probabilities that temporarily seem impossible. But it's, for me, things that I feel like are coming online. Like, for example, basic survival needs are met. So human beings aren't working to meet survival needs. And so then what happens, like the radical revolution that happens in what is work if we don't have to work to survive, is one of the, there's many probabilities. But I say this for a few reasons. One is that I wonder what like for me, in wandering into this new world that wants to be born right now, for me, we're in a healing process as individual people and collectively as human beings, and then as a species. And so I've come up with quite a few models for how we could facilitate collective healing, and more seem to be emerging every day. And I wonder about what this, like, what the investment community, as I've like started, I mean, I'm actively right now like putting together what would be like a pitch deck for a global decentralized network of healing centers. And we're scheduling, I guess, bi-weekly, every other week retreats, creating unified fields of coherence, which are pods of awareness where people can come and actually metabolize unprocessed emotions and energy, and do trauma work and shadow work, and do healing processes that then open up higher orders of consciousness, right, in individuals and in collectives. And I've wondered as I share this with the world, which hasn't quite started yet. I mean, it's happened in a small scale, but this seems like there'll be more to share. Like, the return, I don't know if anybody would make $30 on the dollar that they put into it, right? It's a different consciousness of like, am I going to get a return on my investment in a financial sense? Or is like, it's possible, maybe, I'm wondering about it. And like, what about return on investment about like the world that my great grandkids get to live in, right? Or like our planet's health, for example, like being able to take a planetary perspective and say, like Fionn and I were having a conversation the other day about the global financial system right now, and comparing it to the fascial system in the body. And Darshan, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the fascial system, but
No, I'm not very familiar.
so the fascia runs through our body. It's the interconnective tissue that connects all of our organs. It connects all of our muscles and joints and bones. I'm fascinated with fascia. And my experience has been that trauma and memory, like it's like a memory card in our bodies of all the experiences we've had, and emotions and traumas, and it's like our body's record of everything that we've ever gone through. So I do body work on people, and do some healing modalities with both in the consciousness space, and do psychosomatic work. But there's I see that in the global financial system, that money is this interconnective tissue that connects all of us. And in the same way that we can have trauma in our fascial system in our body, I see that manifesting in the global financial system. And so in the same way with the body, where we want to work life force energy and blood and water into an area where there might be a calcification in fascia, like there might be an actual knot. It's like, how could we look at the financial system and move money to start actually like pumping some life back into the tissue of the collective fabric that weaves it, that connects all of us. And so I just raised these as like, right now there is, there's this interesting question of groups of like, what's it like to cultivate groups of, like, we're talking about where is the hierarchy actually. Like some hierarchies are based on your gray hair, some hierarchies are based on your education level, some hierarchies are stage of development, or worldview. And I wonder in our game, which hierarchy is the one that gets to build the game, right? Like somebody gets to construct the game, and it sounds like in ours it's developmentally informed. And in this reality context, how can the resources of the industrial revolution and achievement consciousness that seems to still be the kind of power it be in the world, with maybe a transition into postmodernism, be integrated and informed by like a planetary and more universal worldview that has a much wider time horizon? It might be doing things that might not generate returns, in this financial quarter or year or even lifetime. And are necessary if you know, if humanity is going to continue to evolve and if we're going to have a healthy planet for generations to come to live on. So that's what comes up for me a little bit.
Amazing. Thank you. Fionn?
I've got a drill going on in the background here, so it'll probably mess up my audio a little bit. Yeah, I mean, I'm curious about the cross intersections of everything that we've been talking about, right? So there's like the concept that you brought up just there, Forrest, about like, you know, investment beyond the concept of just, you know, monetary return. And, you know, I think that I see it almost as like a cross between investment and like philanthropy, you know, kind of like it's something that and clearly there's lots of people out there that are willing to invest in projects that they don't even care if they get return because they just want to, you know, help the world. And then it's, you know, the structures, the systems that you've been talking about, Darshan, of the way in which investment and startups and all of that field works. And part of my kind of energy kind of goes into not just how do we play the game that is being played right now, but how do we transcend that and create a new game whereby the rules are different. And that's kind of what I'm hearing Forrest talk about too, is not necessarily trying to play into the game that currently exists, but saying, hey, what's an entirely new game that we could co-create that we all know is actually, you know, going to serve humanity, the planet, consciousness better than this old game that we've been playing for so long. And that brings me a little bit to the whole Game B. Are you familiar with Game B, Forrest? Yeah, Darshan, have you heard of the Game B community? No. So this is interesting. This is interesting kind of community. There's a few people around it. I mean, there's some criticism of the community too, which are, you know, seem valid to me. But it's this idea that, you know, the world is currently operating by Game A. And a lot of what you talked about in the investment field and startup field and business field and all of that is all interconnected into, let's call Game A the current way in which society operates, right? But that in order for us to actually thrive as a species, Game A is not going to work because Game A is a self-terminating system, right? It's going to destroy itself. And what needs to be created is this entirely new game that is, you know, built on different principles. And what I'm hearing Forrest talking about in terms of the inflection point of consciousness at this point in history is it seems very much like we're undergoing an entirely new paradigm. We're seeing this in so many different fields, and yet it's still a minority, right? It's still, you know, not quite at the tipping point, it seems, but maybe not that far off due to exponential technologies and the speed at which we're developing and having younger and younger people popping up into later stages of development. And so the question that I have is kind of like the bridge to that new world, right? Because you can't build it on nothing, right? It has to have some sort of, you know, foundation, even if that foundation is a moving foundation, because what is built on top is so agile or strong in terms of, we talk about fascia, it has enough like tensegrity, it has enough kind of capacity to be able to move on a structure that's not very stable, but that it's actually built on something. And so it's this kind of building something on top that is going to survive, even if that lower thing kind of implodes or explodes or breaks down or whatever, that it's both been built on top as well as has enough structure to stay there, even if the other one falls. And so that's what I'm curious in terms of leaning into, is beyond an individual project, is looking at kind of the greater system of potential projects that could co-create this greater outside system, right, that can be developed in humanity. And that's where my interest in kind of, you know, some maybe younger, later stage people comes into the mix, because it's like, I don't see this as kind of like a one project going to save the world kind of thing, but it's like a collection of projects, an entirely new generation of, whether we call them entrepreneurs or people who are, caring about planet Earth or whatever it may be, beyond a postmodern perspective, that we can co-create something that is going to be the foundation for what is to come. And that for me is going beyond kind of like a, hey, here's an individual project that we can get some investment around. And it's more like a, how do we co-create an ecosystem that is going to be in support of everything that we're talking about. And that then becomes, a way in which new structures can be built upon, right? It's almost like building the stairway as you're walking it kind of thing. It's like, well, if we don't know how to get there, how do we build the stairway to get there so that we can have something to stand on? And I think that is it's a hard, I don't know, like a hard pill to swallow, a hard concept to accept from a certain worldview, right? And from a kind of, let's call it a more conscious or a more evolved worldview, it's kind of like clearly that's what's necessary in order for this to actually get built. And with the number of emerging technologies that we have kind of popping up around the place at the moment, and the number of human beings that seem to be, accessing kind of later stages of consciousness, combined with the fact that we live in a global world now where, Forrest is in the US and you're in India and I'm in China, and we're having a conversation about these kinds of things like it's normal, that there is this new fabric is already being built. And part of what I'm kind of curious about is partially making that explicit so that more energy can go into it from more different people.
I was just jotting down some notes. I have a habit of jotting down when we are speaking. That's how I retain, and some really good thoughts which I can send through as follow on. Let it marinate a little bit. I just need to head out in a couple of minutes, unfortunately. But I hope we can just wrap up this call for now and then continue the discussion. Should we do that?
Beautiful.
Okay, so this has been good. I have a lot to think about and a lot to reflect on. There's another guy within the Jump Shift team. He was one of our first facilitators, Peter Shibley. He now is based out of, he moved back or moved from New Zealand to Europe. And so now he is based out of Zurich. He and I have had so many conversations around the concept of money and how money and the world being incentivized money, what are the pros and cons. We'd go down this rabbit hole multiple times. And so thinking a lot on those directions, like what is the other incentive structure, the anchor in this new world, and what would we leave behind, what would we get? I think some thoughts around that, but I'll share those maybe the next time around we have some conversation or as a follow-up note, just with the view of time.
Well, thank you, Darshan. It's been an honor and a joy to meet you and to be with you. Thank you, Fionn, for convening us. I've had a blast as always, and I'm sure it could go on for hours more. So I look forward to doing this again if and when the time is right. Happy to be in touch in between in whatever way that takes shape. And yeah, there's a real honoring in me of the time we've had, and there's so much more ready to come through right now. So I'm just really enjoying honoring the closing and the opening at the same time.
Sorry about the drill in the background. Yeah, I'm excited for the possibilities that can emerge out of this conversation, and looking at it kind of more of like a fuel for the greater emergence of what's coming than a sort of like a locking something in. I'm trying my best these days to kind of get comfortable with the being excited about a construction that is being made while not getting attached to it, and the possibility of continually coming up with new constructions and using those as the stepping stones that are being built without being stuck to this being the specific construction, which is almost kind of paradoxical when it gets to the point that you made, Darshan, earlier about like having conviction for one specific idea, right? It's like almost the reverse of that, while also including the conviction for a longer term, something that we care so much about that I would absolutely never let it go, but also allowing the crumbling of an idea that may not live to see the light of day because something else emerges afterwards that transcends and includes it.
With you 100% on that one. It's been an absolute joy to start this day and the week this way. You know, it's so energizing. Lovely to meet you, Forrest. You know, so much to learn from you. And with Fionn, every single conversation is a spark, right? And all you need is a spark to kind of get started. So yeah, so looking forward to many more such conversations, but also kind of always probably the executioner in me, right, is like, all right, so you know, how do we bring this to something that's a little bit more relevant, and what is it that we can do, right? What is the MVP? What is it? We are living in a very effectual way. Effectuation is essentially a decision-making framework whereby you let naturally people come together, and so you get certain resources, certain means, and through those resources means something new is born, right? And so, but there also needs like a channeling to a large extent, and I'm a little focused on that as well. So I will admit that. And yeah, so let me know how we could proceed, what we would do. I do tend to get impatient, so you'll have to bear with me. I have this habit of, all right, you know, uh, we, we gotta, it's a balance between patience and impatience for action. That's all. So would love to hear your thoughts and how we could reconvene as well, at what point.
What's coming up for you, Forrest?
What's coming up for me we talked about the move from idea to commitment to conviction, and I know that when I left the startup community, there had been a profound awareness for a while of I can't not do this, like I can't not live into this emergent emergent creative process, and at some point that evolved from I can't not do this to I can't not be this, and actually like came online as a way of being, and like a breath by breath game, like breath by breath off the pillow meditation. And yeah, so that comes up. In terms of reconvening, I'm happy to whenever feels good. I mean, I'm fortunate enough to see Fionn a couple of times a week in different contexts, um, and I've just really enjoyed this container. I love. I fully welcome the execution, action-oriented, even impatient energy. I fully welcome that. That so lives in me. That so lives in me. And I welcome the other energies that live in me of infinite patience and enjoy how those peacefully coexist in me. So excited to see where that takes us.
I'm imagining for now, maybe playing around with Forrest a little bit in sort of coming up with something that is a little bit more tangible, that is kind of executionable. And Darshan also kind of reconvening with you kind of on a regular kind of slot and seeing kind of how ideas come forward and allowing those to kind of organically come back together, and, you know, having touch points with you both, how we can sort of come together in a way that honors the infinite patience and the impatience all at once.
Sounds fun.
What comes up for me is we all have a calendar invite with the 3 of our emails. So if at any point the impulse arises in any of the 3 of us to convene another gathering for the 3, I'd love for whoever that comes through to extend the invitation.
Yeah. And then does this time kind of work for everyone? Yeah. Yeah. So maybe, yeah. So let's so for me, I'm going to just digest this a little bit more, and then yeah, I think definitely would love to have a follow-on conversation and see how this evolves. Great. All right. Lovely to meet you. Have a great day ahead, great week ahead, and be safe. You know, we are still not over the pandemic, so sending good wishes and good care.
To you as well. Thank you.
See you.
See you, Darshan. Catch you soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
My drill seems to be off for a little while. That was curious. It was interesting to sort of have a different